Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be going a build guide showcase for the Bane of Winter SpellBlade. So the concept around this build is to build around the new unique that came in with patch 1.1, Bane of Winter. This is a drop from the Herot Harbinger, and it's a pretty okay weapon. Most of its stats are irrelevant for what we're doing, although the cold damage taken as physical is nice. Mainly, we're utilizing it for the Void Winter bolts and for the flat damage added to cold and void spells. In this case, the cold spells are going to be like Ice Barrage and Morning and what is it called? Frostclaw. So of course, the idea is to utilize a melee attack to cast Frostclaw, and then use that Frostclaw to proc Ice Barrage, which then deals a lot of our single target damage. And we were trying to build around the Void Winter bolts. Sadly, I think the numbers on these things are insanely conservative for the more damage for time rot chance and stuff like that. These numbers are absolutely puny. I would be surprised if there was a bug fix and they swapped the two, where it was 10% more damage per time rot chance or something like that. As currently right now, the Void Winter bolts, they hit around like 20 to 30k on the dummy, which isn't that bad, but when you combine it with the trigger a few times every 2 seconds, that definitely reduces the viability of these things. But I was not waylaid by such limitations as damage with this build, which was funny. Also as well, apparently during the time that I was planning on playing and leveling this build, Perry, a friend of mine, Perry the Pig, he decided to do a build contest like he normally does, and this time it was going to be, of course, of Bane of Winter. So I had even more reason to play the build, and this is what I came up with. Now, if you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leave a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of currently supporting me and the best way to show me that you want more videos like this one. Now, let's talk about the build. I'm going to be straight up blunt with you, just pure honesty. I don't think that this build is very good at all, to be honest with you. The Void Winter bolts themselves, they were very mediocre in terms of damage. I was very disappointed in their damage output, even though they still could kill trash. They were nowhere near enough to merit the usage of a two-handed spear. Thankfully, the line at the bottom, giving 40% of your flat damage as cold spell damage, was amazing in theory, as you could slam the Bane of Winter with T7 melee cold, and then all of a sudden you have like 250 melee cold, which is then halved, and that's added as, spell damage. And of course, that would have worked pretty well if I didn't go on a loss streak of 21 Bane of Winters that I bricked. If you don't know, I was trying to go for a 2 LP Bane of Winter with 1 melee cold T7 and 1 with attack speed, and I bricked 21 of them in a row. 21 2 LP Bane of Winters. They were all bricked in the name of the Omnissiah. Awful. Absolutely awful. That has completely waylaid the creation of this build entirely. This would have been done yesterday or maybe the day before if I didn't spend the last 3 days grinding a lot of currency and trying to actually make a spear that was worth a damn. And oh boy, was it worth somewhat anyways. I actually like this build. This is one of those builds where I would normally not showcase. I would just brick and just move on. But one, there's the, there's the build contest, and that was enjoyable. Also as well, there is the, what is it called? Just my enjoyment of the build in general. I like the build and I like how it feels, but it kind of felt short in a lot of ways. I think that this is a good example of how increasing boss HP significantly over the past few patches has reduced build diversity in some way or another. Now, of course, if you ask the devs, that isn't the case at all, because 1% of people get to empowered monoliths. So technically, by statistics, if you even get to empowered monoliths, technically your build is a success. Of course, I do not levy myself to such low standards, so I usually push around to like 700-ish corruption. I did push to 700-ish corruption on stream, and it was a time. It was probably some of the worst times I've ever actually played Last Epoch, trying to push this build up into higher corruption. And that was for a few main reasons. First things off, we're using a two-handed spear. Two-handed spears aren't very good items, especially with the insane roll ranges that this item has. I'm surprised it just doesn't save 42% more damage. It doesn't need the roll range. It's not powerful enough to mandate the roll range. Maybe if the Void Winter bolts were actually good, maybe it could. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, nonetheless, the damage wasn't high enough. You could just play a normal build, a normal Mana Strike with a normal like Frost Claw setup, a normal Ice Barrage setup, and you would do much better than what I'm currently doing, because your attack speed would be significantly higher. Another thing that sucked was the defenses. I tried a ward per second base defense because I had faith in EHG's balanced abilities to make ward per second feel good, but ward per second did not feel good whatsoever, so I had to pretty much cannibalize the build and set it up as a hybrid health build, which had mediocre results, mainly because a lot of the uniques that I was using for this build actually ended up going in price significantly due to unscrupulous reasons, meaning that, you know, I just didn't have as much HP as I should have had. I should have like 3.5k HP. Even with a 4 LP chest, it still was not enough to make me feel tanky enough. It felt kind of squishy. And the reason why is if this was any other build, it would have felt fine. I would have had enough defenses, but guess what? We're a build that stands still, right? So I have to stand still to do my single target. And let me tell you, the game does not like that. You have cold tigers, fire tigers, saboteurs, you have diamond matrons, you have gorgons, you have all of these enemies that will jump at the chance that if you stand still for more than a second, they will baste you like Thanksgiving turkey. And it is not worth it at all. It is so much better just to go with a different build that does a little bit more damage while moving, and you're good to go. So please don't play this build. Don't go through the same torment I went, but this will be my submission into the build contest. I don't think I'm going to do an in-depth build showcase this time. I don't believe so, mainly because it's not really worth it, as I don't really suggest this build to anyone else, but we can talk about the build a little bit more in detail. So we used, like I said, a 2 LP Bane of Winter after 21 attempts. We went for melee cold because 42% of our flat damage was added as cold, and if we do the math, that's about as much as a two-handed staff if we land, of course, the melee cold. Now, this should be a straight-up benefit if the Void Winter bolts actually, did their job and was actually good, right? But of course, they're not for obvious reasons. And that was the main part. I was running a Blood of the Exile as well because SpellBlade got giga buffed, if you don't know recently. They got like 8% crit per dex and 1% base crit per 15 intelligence. This has led the build to be significantly better in general. Thankfully, it did get buffed. Otherwise, this would be almost unplayable at all because the spear does not have base crit on it, and we still haven't learned to put base crit on these items, even though, like we should probably put base crit on these items. But thankfully, SpellBlade is here to save the day with all the base crit at the top of the tree. And all this crit chance allows us to crit cap very easily. Then for other stuff with the build that was specific, Run's Wisdom was an interesting choice. It was fine. It just wasn't good enough. It legitimately just wasn't good enough. Like, I legitimately could not make it good enough. I like the idea of Run's Wisdom on this build, but even that wasn't enough to carry the build. Even a 4 LP Run's Wisdom was not enough to carry the build. There was only one on the market, and it was like 10 million gold. It was a complete waste of time, but I put it on anyways, and it was like, okay. Now, a lot of people are going to ask me, Dread, why don't you play Morning Frost? Well, if you go and do the math with the Bane of Winter, right? 42% of your spell damage added as cold for spells, right? So you get 2 flat per Morning Frost, and one of that is spell damage and one of that is melee. So it turns it from 2 flat cold per intelligence, per dex for your for your Frost Claw specifically, it changes to 2.5. And to stack that much dexterity while also having useful stats on your build would not be good enough. Focusing on the Void Winter Bolts is a fruitless endeavor currently with their current damage scaling. I think the biggest problem with them is I just don't know why they're capped. They don't need to be capped. They do plenty of they don't do enough damage to be capped. I'm very surprised that they're capped. If they weren't capped, you could play something like Shatter Strike and maybe try going that angle with the Morning Frost tech. But right now, while it's capped, I don't think Void Winter Bolts are going to be good enough. But with all that being said, this has been Dread. No one's probably going to watch this video because no one likes watching videos of me failing builds, but thank you for coming to the end of the video anyways. Bye.